He claimed the voices told him to kill, but the truth was even more chilling. David Berkowitz, the son of Sam, terrorized New York City, leaving behind a trail of blood and fear. By the time the police caught him, 6 people were dead, and his story was far from over. But the question still lingers. Was he really hearing voices, or was there something darker lurking in his mind? This is the story of a man driven to kill, and the twisted truth that followed. It all began on July 29, 1976, when an 18-year-old woman named Donna Loria was sitting in her car with her boyfriend in the Bronx. They were parked outside Donna's apartment building, just talking, when a figure emerged from the shadows. The man approached their vehicle, raised a gun, and without any warning, shot Donna in the head. Her boyfriend, John, was also struck, but he miraculously survived, wounded but conscious enough to drive himself to a nearby hospital. The attack was terrifying and random. There was no apparent motive, no pattern. At first, police were at a loss. Donna was just an ordinary teenager, and there was no reason to think that she would be targeted in such a brutal way. Her boyfriend's survival, however, gave police a faint hope that they might be able to catch the person responsible. But that hope quickly faded. Just over a week later, on August 5, 1976, a similar attack occurred in Queens. This time, it was 19-year-old Christine Frund and her fiancé, John Dial. They were sitting in a parked car, just like Donna and her boyfriend had been, when a man approached and opened fire. Christine was killed instantly, while John was left critically wounded. His survival once again gave the police a potential lead, but again, the attacker had no obvious motive. No connections between the victims, no clear clues. As the days passed, more victims were targeted and the terror spread across the city. Each attack followed the same chilling pattern: a young couple sitting in their car at night, ambushed by a mysterious assailant who seemed to take pleasure in their fear. The media, the public, and the police all grew increasingly anxious. It was clear that a serial killer was on the loose. But there was something else, something even more chilling that no one had yet discovered. The pattern was not just random violence, it was methodical, and it was just the beginning of something far darker. David Berkowitz had begun his killing spree, and he was only getting started. The summer of 1976 in New York City was marked by a growing sense of dread. The victims of the Son of Sam were not just statistics in a police report. They were real people with families, dreams, and futures that were tragically stolen from them. Each victim was humanized, and their stories, though brief, would haunt the city for years to come. The first murder, Donna Loria, was a stark introduction to the terror that would follow. Donna was a vibrant young woman full of life and promise. She was an 18-year-old college student with plans for the future, but that future was violently cut short. She had just finished a late-night shift at a local diner when she and her boyfriend decided to stop at her apartment for a quiet moment. They had no idea they were sitting ducks, unaware of the killer lurking in the darkness, waiting for his chance to strike. Her death marked the beginning of what would become a deadly pattern. What made these attacks so chilling was not just the randomness of the murders, but the way the killer selected his victims. They were often young couples, out in the quiet of the night, enjoying each other's company. In many ways, they were the image of innocence, living their lives without the faintest inkling of the terror that was about to befall them. But it wasn't just the violence that made the Son of Sam's crimes so unsettling. It was the method. The killer didn't just shoot and run. He had a chilling signature. He seemed to take his time, carefully planning each attack. No one understood yet why he targeted these particular victims, but his next victims would provide some answers. The sense of fear was palpable. The city, once full of life and bustling with energy, began to feel like a ticking time bomb. No one knew who the killer was or where he would strike next, but the city held its collective breath, waiting for the next attack. The son of Sam was not just a killer. He was a force of terror that would continue to haunt the streets of New York for months to come. And as the police began to realize, the pattern of his crimes was far from random. Something more sinister was at play. As the summer wore on, the brutality of the attacks began to weigh heavily on the public psyche. New York City, once bustling with its usual vibrancy, had turned into a city of paranoia and fear. The authorities, initially unsure of what they were dealing with, were starting to see a disturbing pattern in the killings. It wasn't just random violence. It was the work of a methodical and calculating serial killer. And with every passing day, the pressure mounted to catch him. By the end of August, just weeks after the murders of Donna Lauria and Christine Freund, the killer struck again, this time in a fashion that seemed more deliberate and familiar. The newest victims, 20-year-old Valerie and her boyfriend, were shot in a similar manner to the previous attacks. Once again, the killer had approached his victims as they sat in their car, seemingly unaware of the imminent danger. Valerie was killed, while her boyfriend, though critically wounded, survived the attack. The pattern was unmistakable. There were no obvious connections between the victims. Some were college students, others were young professionals, all living their ordinary lives until the son of Sam came for them. The victims didn't seem to fit a specific demographic. There was no racial, social, or economic pattern. But despite the randomness, there was one thing that linked them all together: the fear that had begun to grip the city. As the investigation continued, police finally started to look at the geography of the crimes. Each attack had occurred within a 20-mile radius, and the locations were clustered along familiar routes in the outer boroughs of New York City, including the Bronx, Queens, and Brooklyn. It was clear that the killer had a specific area he was operating in, but beyond that, the leads were slim. In the midst of this growing terror, something unexpected happened. A chilling letter was sent to the New York Daily News on July 29, 1977, the one-year anniversary of Donna Lauria's murder. The letter, written in a disjointed and erratic style, was signed "Son of Sam." It was a cryptic message full of dark threats and delusions, in which the killer described his need to kill and his obsession with terrorizing the city. The letter seemed to hint at a greater motivation, one rooted in madness and self-deception. But there was more. It contained the killer's own interpretation of the events. He wasn't just acting on his own impulses, but he believed he was being guided by a demonic force. The killer's letter sent shockwaves through the city. No one had expected a direct communication from the killer himself, and it raised more questions than answers. Who was this man who was claiming responsibility for these horrific crimes, and what did his letter mean? Was it just the ramblings of a madman, or was there a deeper truth to his words? The case had just taken a dark turn, and with the letter came new fear and confusion. The public was now more afraid than ever, and the police were under increasing pressure to catch the man responsible. But even with the letter as a clue, they had no idea who the killer was or where he would strike next. The search for the son of Sam had become a race against time as the streets of New York grew darker and more dangerous with each passing day. David Berkowitz was not the monstrous figure people imagined him to be.
On the surface, he seemed just like any other man living in New York City. He was a quiet, somewhat introverted 24-year-old man who worked as a postal worker in Yonkers. To his neighbors, he was an unremarkable figure, a man who kept to himself, who rarely caused a stir. He blended into the fabric of the city streets, unnoticed and unassuming. But behind the mundane facade of David Berkowitz lay a far darker truth, a truth that had remained hidden for years. Berkowitz's childhood was one marked by abandonment and emotional trauma. Born Richard David Falco in 1953, his early life was far from typical. He was adopted by a couple, Nathan and Pearl Berkowitz, when he was just an infant. His biological mother, Elizabeth, had been a teenager when she gave birth to him and was unable to care for him. While he was provided with a stable home, Berkowitz's relationship with his adoptive mother was strained. He often felt neglected and emotionally isolated, though it's unclear whether this feeling was purely a product of his own inner turmoil or the reality of his upbringing. Berkowitz's struggles with his identity began early on, and by the time he was a teenager, he was acting out in violent ways. He'd been in and out of therapy, but nothing seemed to stick. The anger he felt toward his adoptive parents and the confusion he experienced over his adoption festered in him, growing over the years. His emotional distress eventually manifested itself in violent fantasies and actions. In the years leading up to the killings, Berkowitz had joined the U.S. Army, serving in Korea from 1971 to 1974. His time in the military was marked by further emotional instability and outbursts of violence. His time in Korea seemed to deepen his sense of isolation and resentment toward society, especially when he returned to the United States. He felt alienated and disconnected from everyone around him, including his fellow soldiers. It was during this time that Berkowitz began to nurture his darkest thoughts, which would later manifest in his killing spree. But Berkowitz didn't act alone. He claimed that he was under the control of a demon that spoke to him through his neighbor's dog, a black lab named Harvey. The voices, according to Berkowitz, came from the dog, which would bark at him incessantly, giving him orders to kill. He later referred to the dog as the demon that had been pushing him to commit the heinous acts. The voices seemed to fuel his delusions and gave him a sense of purpose, even though there was no tangible evidence to support his claims. In the years following his arrest, Berkowitz would further insist that he had been part of a larger satanic cult and that the murders were part of a larger conspiracy. But as investigators dug deeper into his life, they found no substantial proof that Berkowitz had any connection to a cult. It seemed that, at least in part, the delusions were born of his own disturbed mind. Berkowitz's ability to blend into society, despite the deep darkness within him, shocked those who later came to know his true nature. He was the last person anyone would have suspected. His carefully cultivated persona of an unremarkable postal worker allowed him to carry out his crimes without raising suspicion. He was not the monster everyone feared. He was just a man who had lost control of his own mind, driven to violence by forces both real and imagined. As the weeks went by and the bodies began to pile up, Berkowitz's increasingly erratic behavior was the only sign that something was horribly wrong. But to the outside world, he remained a quiet, ordinary man. The truth about the man behind the Son of Sam killings was only just beginning to unfold, and it was far more disturbing than anyone could have imagined.
David Berkowitz's killings were not random acts of violence. They were part of a chillingly deliberate pattern that he meticulously followed. Each murder followed a specific set of criteria, and with each attack, the violence escalated. His method was cold, calculated, and devoid of mercy, making it clear that the Son of Sam was not merely driven by the desire to kill, but by an obsession to terrorize and control. David Berkowitz's arrest in August 1977 ended a year-long reign of terror in New York City. When caught, Berkowitz immediately confessed, stating, "I'm the son of Sam," offering chilling details of his killings. He claimed that his murders were driven by voices from a demon speaking through his neighbor's dog, Harvey, which instructed him to kill. He also spoke of a satanic cult, but provided no evidence of any such organization. Berkowitz's trial began in 1978, becoming a media spectacle. His defense argued that he was insane, pointing to his delusions as proof of mental illness. However, prosecutors argued that his actions were premeditated, showing a clear understanding of his crimes. Despite his claims of supernatural influence, Berkowitz had carefully stalked and targeted his victims, leaving behind taunting letters, suggesting he was in control. Berkowitz was found guilty of 6 murders and several attempted murders. He was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. The trial exposed the twisted mind behind the killings, but for the victims' families, there was no true closure. The public struggled to understand how a seemingly ordinary man could commit such horrific crimes. Berkowitz's life sentence did little to ease the pain for those affected. Over the years, Berkowitz would offer more insights into his delusions, but the question of whether he was truly insane or just a cold-blooded killer would linger. His capture brought an end to the terror, but the mystery of his mind remained unsolved. David Berkowitz's capture ended the terror he had inflicted on New York City, but the scars remained. While many felt relief, the emotional toll on the victims' families was immense. The families were left to mourn their loved ones, knowing that no justice could truly heal the wounds left by such senseless violence. For them, Berkowitz's conviction was a form of justice, but it did little to alleviate their suffering. The Son of Sam murders also reshaped law enforcement's approach to serial killings, prompting better communication between police departments and the development of psychological profiles for offenders. These lessons would influence future investigations. In prison, Berkowitz later claimed to have found God and expressed remorse for his actions. However, his past would forever haunt him, as the memory of the monster who once terrorized New York City remained a chilling reminder of the evil that had once lurked in their midst.
If you found this story chilling and captivating, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Stay tuned for more true crime stories, deep dives, and unsolved mysteries every week. Your journey into the darkest corners of true crime starts here.